Her ex-lover hoped to mock her at his wedding, until she arrived married to the vampire lord. Tonight, the nobles gathered to celebrate a union long awaited, Lord Damien's wedding. Rich tapestries fluttered in the gentle breeze from the open windows, candles flickered, and the scent of roses mixed with the sharp tang of polished armor. Music floated through the room, yet for some, joy felt hollow, a fragile mask over sharper emotions. Lady Seraphine entered quietly, her cloak brushing against the polished floor. The hall froze for a heartbeat, and whispers began like wind through dry leaves. Those who once remembered her as a gentle, timid lady now saw a woman transformed, tall, poised, and striking, with a fire in her eyes that few dared to meet. Her lips curved in a calm, knowing smile, though her heart thrummed beneath her ribs. She had returned not as a girl hurt by betrayal, but as someone who had discovered strength in the shadows. All eyes eventually landed on her, and for a moment, even the musicians faltered, their hands frozen mid-strum. Then, as if released from a spell, the hall erupted in quiet murmurs. Lord Damien's gaze fell upon her, and his own composure wavered. His jaw tightened, and a faint flush touched his cheeks. Pride and surprise wrestled within him. He had expected a timid ex-lover, maybe even a humiliated shadow of the past. Instead, Seraphine appeared like a storm wrapped in silk, untouchable, commanding, and utterly unafraid. Yet she was not alone. Behind her, tall and imposing, moved Kale, the vampire lord. His presence was undeniable, like the deep shadow of a mountain cast over the sun. Eyes that burned like molten gold swept the hall with quiet authority. The air seemed to shift, heavier, darker, and yet strangely alive. Those nearest to him instinctively stepped back. Even Damien felt a pang of unease. There was power in Kale's silence, an unspoken warning that no one dared ignore. Seraphine's hand brushed Kale's, a simple gesture that sent a ripple of tension across the hall. Damien's heart clenched. He had once believed he knew every depth of Seraphine, every fear, every longing. But now she carried a presence he could not touch, a strength and calm that made him doubt himself. And Kale was a force beyond human reckoning, a dark tide that made Damien feel small, even dangerous in his own court. The music shifted, softening, and the bride entered. All eyes turned to the expected scene of joy, yet Damien could not focus. He tried to summon the practiced smile of the noble host, yet it faltered under the weight of Seraphine's gaze. She did not speak, yet her eyes held a question, a memory of days lost and promises broken. Damien felt a pull, a whisper of regret he had not expected, a reminder of what he had cast aside too easily. Kale's hand rested lightly on Seraphine's back, grounding her. He did not speak, but his presence alone seemed to say, "This woman belongs to me, yet she is hers first." It was a quiet declaration, one that made Damien's pulse quicken. He tried to hide his curiosity behind a mask of dignity, but every movement, every glance betrayed him. The old arrogance had not vanished. It had only met its match in a new, more dangerous game. As the ceremony progressed, Seraphine's thoughts were a mixture of calm observation and quiet calculation. She had returned to this hall not for revenge, not to prove a point, but to face the past and claim her own power. She remembered every moment of heartbreak, every whispered insult, every time Damien had believed he could mock or diminish her. Now, none of that mattered. She was not a shadow to be cast aside. She was light and darkness entwined, an entity neither fully human nor fully otherworldly. Damien's bride, a woman of noble grace but fragile resolve, approached him, and Seraphine watched quietly. She did not interfere. That was not her role tonight. Yet every subtle movement, every shared glance between Damien and his bride, seemed to remind him of the past he had attempted to erase. Seraphine's heart beat not with malice but with a curious mixture of empathy and sorrow. She understood his weakness, pride and fear, longing and regret, and yet she remained untouchable. Cale's eyes occasionally flicked to Damien, sharp and calculating. He did not speak, but Seraphine felt his thoughts in quiet pulses, protective and commanding. She knew his mind well enough to see the silent challenge. This man is dangerous to you. He must not touch you again. It was both a warning and a promise, one that tightened the invisible bond between them. As the ceremony drew to a close, the hall erupted into applause, and the newlyweds were pronounced together. Damien forced a smile, applauding, yet his thoughts were elsewhere, circling Seraphine and the presence that had transformed her. He tried to ignore the cold burn of jealousy, but it gnawed at him. She had changed, and with her change came an aura of power he could not command, a confidence he could not diminish. Then came the moment of departure. Seraphine and Cale moved gracefully through the hall, their every step measured, their calm almost regal. Damien's eyes followed, trying to hold onto the image of the past, the memory of what he had lost. The crowd parted as if the shadows themselves had been summoned, giving way to the power that walked beside her. Whispers filled the hall, rumors, speculation, fear, admiration. The air itself seemed to shiver. A sudden movement caught Damien's attention. One of the bridesmaids, a young noble girl with wide, innocent eyes, had dropped a delicate lace handkerchief. Seraphine paused, bending slightly to retrieve it. Her fingers brushed the girl's, and she offered a kind, fleeting smile. The gesture was small, yet it revealed something Damien had not anticipated. A tenderness beneath the armor, a human warmth beneath the otherworldly power. His heart constricted. He realized then that he had underestimated her completely. She was not simply a woman bound to a vampire lord. She was her own force, her own story, and he was only a spectator. Cale's hand found hers again, guiding her with subtle authority. They moved toward the balcony, where the night sky stretched wide and dark above the city, stars glimmering like shards of frozen fire. The wind caught Seraphine's cloak, lifting it in a slow, dramatic wave, as if the night itself heralded her power. Damien followed from below, torn between admiration, longing, and regret. He could see the bond she shared with Cale, the silent understanding and deep trust, and it cut him more deeply than he expected. Seraphine looked down at the city below, then at the man beside her, and she allowed herself a quiet sigh. The past was behind her. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the scorn, it no longer defined her. Yet the memories lingered, ghosts that whispered caution and remembrance. She knew Damien's presence tonight was not by accident. Fate had drawn him here to witness her transformation and perhaps to test her resolve. Cale's voice, low and smooth, broke the quiet. "He is dangerous to you, but he cannot harm you tonight." His eyes gleamed, and Seraphine felt the weight of both warning and protection. She nodded, understanding the subtle balance of power at play. Tonight she was untouchable, yet she would not crush him entirely. There was poetry in restraint, in allowing the past to meet the present and observe its own consequences. Damien's gaze remained fixed on them, and for a moment the world seemed to shrink to the space between the three. The city below, the court within, the grand hall itself, all faded into shadow and silence. In that instant, Damien realized a terrifying truth. He had lost her, truly and irrevocably, and the woman he had underestimated now walked among forces beyond his comprehension. As the night deepened, Seraphine leaned slightly against Cale's shoulder, her hand finding his. They were two entities bound in power, in choice, and in the quiet promise of something eternal. And yet, even in their unity, the shadow of Damien lingered, a reminder that the past is never fully gone. A sudden chill swept over the balcony, and the stars seemed to dim, as if the night itself held its breath. Whispers reached Seraphine's ears, not from the crowd below, but from the shadows, soft and strange, hinting at forces yet unseen. She tightened her grip on Cale's hand, her mind alert. Something had shifted tonight, a pulse of danger and destiny she could not ignore. And then in the quietest moment, Damien's voice, sharp and trembling, broke the stillness from below. You are not the woman I knew. It was not anger, nor jealousy, nor malice. It was recognition, awe, and something far deeper, fear. Seraphine's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. The first act of the night was complete. The stage was set. The shadows of the past had come to the present, and the next move belonged not to the mortal who had loved her, but to the woman who had learned to command both light and dark. Kale's voice, quiet and commanding, whispered in her ear, "They will test you, but you are ready." Seraphine nodded. Her heart still held echoes of what was lost, but she had found strength in the shadows, and the night stretched before them, full of promise, danger, and awakening. Cliffhanger, from the depths of the hall below, a soft, almost inaudible whisper slithered through the marble and candlelight. She should not have returned, not like this. The words carried a warning, a challenge, and a threat, one that promised that the night's trials had only just begun. The night had deepened over Castle Alaric, but the celebrations below had faded into uneasy murmurs. Lady Seraphine stood on the balcony with Kale, the vampire lord, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. Yet even in the serenity of their union, the tension of her return to Damien's court lingered like a shadow she could not shake. The hall had been alive with whispers, and she knew that some were not idle gossip. There were those who watched her arrival with envy, curiosity, and fear. Kale's presence beside her was steady, like a stone placed in the current of a rushing river. His golden eyes scanned the dark horizon, unblinking, alert. "They will test you," he said quietly, his voice low and smooth. "Not all of them will wish to see your strength succeed. Some will try to bend it for their own gain." Seraphine nodded, her hand brushing over his. "I am ready," she said, though the truth was that she still felt the subtle weight of the past clinging to her heart. She had faced loss, betrayal, and humiliation, and yet every trial had sharpened her. Tonight she carried herself as both shadow and flame, a presence no man could ignore. The next day, the court began in earnest. Seraphine and Kale entered the throne room, and the courtiers immediately recognized the subtle shift in power. She was no longer a guest to be humored or dismissed. She moved with quiet authority, each gesture deliberate, each glance measured. Kale, silent and imposing, seemed to draw the very shadows around him into protective coils. The nobles sensed it, and whispers spread like wildfire. Some were afraid, others were intrigued. Damien was already there, seated near the high dais, his posture stiff, his jaw tight. He had spent the night turning over the sight of Seraphine in his mind, struggling to reconcile the woman before him with the girl he had once believed he knew. Pride, shame, curiosity, and lingering desire battled within him. Every instinct told him to approach her, to speak, to reclaim a place that was no longer his. Yet the presence of Kale, a being of immense power and quiet danger, kept him frozen, aware of the limits of his mortal influence. Seraphine noticed his gaze, subtle but unbroken. It reached her across the room, sharp and probing. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile, one that carried no cruelty but full understanding. He wanted to understand, to test her, to see whether she had truly changed. And she, in turn, would allow him just enough of a glimpse, without surrendering control. The council meeting began, summoned by King Alaric to discuss matters of trade, security, and the growing threat of the cursed lands beyond the northern mountains. Seraphine followed Kale, her mind alert to every nuance of the discussion. She could sense whispers of envy, subtle manipulation, and even fear in the way certain nobles spoke. Some looked at her as though she were a dangerous creature, half human, half something else entirely. Perhaps in some ways she was. Kale's eyes never left her, though he participated minimally in the council. His authority was silent but unyielding. When a particularly arrogant noble tried to question Seraphine's presence, Kale's gaze alone silenced him, leaving the man sweating and muttering excuses. Damien noticed, and a flicker of understanding passed through him. Seraphine's power was not only in the union she shared with Kale, but in the way she commanded presence, focus, and respect. Later, when the council had dispersed, Seraphine wandered into the shadowed corridors of the castle. Kale followed, quiet as a shadow. "There are those who will not forgive easily," he said, voice low. "They will attempt to manipulate, to test, to provoke. You must decide which battles are worth your strength." Seraphine paused by a large window overlooking the city. Moonlight spilled through the glass, illuminating her face. "I do not fear them," she replied softly, "but I will not be careless. I have learned to wait, to see, and to strike only when the moment is mine." Her thoughts turned inevitably to Damien. He had changed, too, she realized. In subtle ways, he carried the weight of regret and the beginnings of understanding. But there was still pride and fear in him, a barrier she would need to navigate carefully. She wondered whether he could ever truly see her as she was now, independent, strong, and beyond the reach of old wounds. The night deepened further, and a soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A young attendant entered, pale and hesitant. "Lady Seraphine, there is a message for you. It is from Damien." She took the note carefully, sensing the trembling in the girl's hands. Unfolding the parchment, her eyes scanned the words, "Meet me in the eastern gardens. Alone, I need to speak." Kale stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "You must be cautious. He may test your patience or he may test his own, but you must decide if you wish to answer." Seraphine's lips curved in a faint, thoughtful smile. "I will meet him, but not as the woman he remembers." The eastern gardens lay in darkness, lit only by silver moonlight and the glow of rare luminescent flowers that bloomed under Kale's protection. The air was thick with fragrance and secrets, the sound of rustling leaves mingling with the distant trickle of water from a hidden fountain. Damien was there, pacing quietly, his hands clasped behind his back. His expression was torn, a mixture of longing, regret, and disbelief. "Seraphine," he said, voice low, carrying both relief and tension. "I did not expect, I could not have imagined," he trailed off, searching her face for answers he feared he might never find. She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "You imagined me small, broken, lost," she said softly. "You imagined I would be the same girl you once knew. That is no longer who I am." He swallowed hard, his pride warring with his curiosity. You have changed. I can see it. But I do not understand. Kale, he is not like any man I have known." Seraphine's eyes flicked to the shadows where Kale watched from the edge of the garden. Even in silence, his presence radiated authority and power. She returned her gaze to Damien. "Kale is my choice. But my power, my strength, those are my own. You should understand that. You cannot diminish what I have become." Damien looked down, his fists clenching and unclenching. I do not wish to fight you. I only wish I had understood sooner. That I had seen you, truly seen you before my pride blinded me." Her heart stirred at his words, a quiet echo of the feelings they had shared long ago, but she remained steady, unyielding. "The past is gone, but you may still learn from it, Damien. That is the only gift it can give you." A sudden rustle in the hedges made both of them glance toward the darkness. From the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in black, its eyes glowing faintly red. The air grew cold, and the soft fragrance of the garden seemed to curdle into something sharp, dangerous. Kale appeared instantly at her side, silent and swift. The figure stopped, watching, unblinking. Seraphine felt the pulse of energy in the garden shift, the invisible threads of magic stretching taut. "You are bold," Kale said, voice like steel and velvet. "But this place is ours. Leave or be tested." The figure hesitated, then vanished into the night, leaving behind a whisper that chilled Seraphine's spine. "The woman of shadow walks among mortals, and the balance will break." Damien's hand brushed against hers, tentative, unsure. Is it safe?" he asked. Seraphine's hand squeezed his briefly, a touch both comforting and cautionary. "For now, But this is only the beginning. You see, Damien, the past is never truly gone, and neither are the forces that shaped it. They returned to the castle together, but the quiet tension followed them like a shadow. Seraphine knew that some nobles would not rest until her influence was tested, her power questioned. And Damien would continue to walk the fine line between awe, desire, and fear. Back in the private chambers, Kale's eyes found hers. "They will challenge you," he said. "Some will do it with words, some with action. You must decide which battles to fight and which to watch. The wrong choice could bring ruin to many." Seraphine nodded. "I am learning," she said, "and I will be ready. But tonight was only the first act. The whispers in the hall, the eyes that followed me, they are only the beginning." Kale's hand brushed hers again. "You are stronger than you know, and I will not let anyone forget it." A sudden knock at the chamber door interrupted them. A messenger entered, pale and breathless. "My lords, Lady Seraphine, you must see this. There is news from the north. Something unnatural, something alive and moving toward the castle." Seraphine's eyes narrowed. "The night has only begun," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "And it seems the shadows are coming alive sooner than we expected." Cliffhanger. From the corridor outside, a faint, echoing laughter carried on the wind, soft, chilling, and familiar. Damien's face paled. Kale's eyes narrowed. Seraphine felt the pulse of destiny tighten around her. The trials were just beginning, and the night had grown far darker than any of them had imagined. The northern wind howled through the corridors of Castle Alaric, rattling the stained glass windows and carrying with it a scent of frost and decay. Seraphine stood at the edge of the battlements, her cloak lifted by the cold gust, her eyes fixed on the shadowed horizon. The message from the north had been clear. Something unnatural was moving toward the castle, something old and restless, and it carried with it a dark pulse that stirred unease even in Kale. Kale appeared silently at her side, his presence like a shadow in the moonlight. His golden eyes scanned the horizon, and Seraphine could feel the tension in his aura tighten. "It grows stronger," he murmured, voice low and smooth. "Whatever comes, it will not wait for us to be ready. It tests our strength, our unity." Seraphine nodded, her fingers brushing over the hilt of the small dagger at her side. "Then we meet it together," she said. Her voice carried no fear, only resolve. She had learned to embrace the shadows, to understand that power was not something to wield carelessly, but to command with focus and clarity. Below, in the castle's courtyard, Damien paced like a caged bird. His hands were clenched, his expression conflicted. He had never faced forces like these, never walked between the mortal and the supernatural with eyes wide open. And yet, he had been drawn closer to Seraphine, compelled by the awareness that she had become something extraordinary. Pride and desire wrestled within him, leaving him uncertain of what was right or safe. When Seraphine descended to meet him, Kale at her side, Damien stepped back instinctively. He did not fear her, not entirely, but he could feel the quiet power that radiated from her, the subtle dominance she now carried. It was not meant to intimidate, it was a warning, a statement of her growth. "Seraphine," Damien said finally, his voice strained. You are unlike anyone I have known. I cannot ignore it. And yet," his eyes flicked to Kale, sharp and uncertain, "and yet I do not understand how to stand beside you now. I am unworthy of the courage I once had to speak to you." Seraphine looked at him steadily, her gaze calm but piercing. "You are not here to claim me, Damien. You are here to see what has grown from the past you abandoned. You will learn patience, and perhaps humility. That is the lesson the shadows bring." Kale's hand brushed her back lightly, a reminder that he was present, protective, yet never controlling her will. "The time for words may come later," he said quietly. "For now, we must face what comes. The North does not wait for reconciliation." As if on cue, the first tremors of the approaching danger reached the castle. The ground beneath their feet shivered, faintly at first, then stronger. Windows rattled. The wind carried whispers of movement, soft but insistent. The creatures of the northern wilds had sensed the rising power of Seraphine and Kale, and they came, drawn like moths to a flame. In the courtyard, the shadows began to twist and stretch unnaturally. Figures emerged, not fully solid, not entirely of this world. Their eyes glowed faintly red, their movements unnatural, gliding rather than walking. Seraphine's heart tightened, but she did not falter. She had trained for moments like this, had learned the ways of shadow and subtle magic that Kale had taught her. Kale stepped forward, his voice carrying authority that seemed to ripple through the courtyard. "Begone," he said, low and commanding. The creatures paused, their forms shimmering, but they did not retreat. Seraphine stepped beside him, raising her hand slightly. A faint glow began to emanate from her fingertips, subtle yet powerful. The creatures recoiled, sensing that she was not merely a mortal standing alongside a vampire lord, but a force of her own. Damien's eyes widened as he watched, a mix of awe and fear flashing across his face. "You have changed," he whispered almost to himself. "You are extraordinary." Seraphine's eyes flicked to him, not with anger but with clarity. "And you have learned nothing yet," she said softly. "This is not a time for admiration. This is a time for understanding the weight of power and responsibility." The creatures surged forward then, shadows coiling and twisting like smoke given form. Kale and Seraphine moved in tandem, a dance of authority and precision. She directed the energy within her, shaping it, guiding it, letting it flow in controlled currents that pushed back the shadows without destroying them entirely. Kale's strength complemented hers, a silent support that allowed her to shine without needing to dominate. Damien moved closer, almost instinctively, drawn by a mixture of fear and the desire to help. He was human, fragile in comparison, but he had courage enough to stand his ground, to witness the power that had once been beyond his comprehension. And in that moment, he realized the depth of what he had lost. The woman before him was no longer someone to protect or possess. She was a force, an entity of shadow and light intertwined. The battle continued, the courtyard alive with energy, whispers, and light. Shadows writhed and hissed, testing Seraphine's resolve and Kale's command. Damien fought alongside them, learning quickly to trust her guidance, to follow her lead rather than challenge it. Every moment was a lesson, every movement a revelation. Finally, the last of the shadows dissipated, retreating northward with a sound like wind through frozen trees. The courtyard fell silent, save for the soft clink of armor and the distant hum of the city at night. Seraphine's chest rose and fell steadily, her cloak fluttering, her hair catching the moonlight. She had prevailed, but the knowledge that this was only the beginning lingered like a pulse beneath her skin. Kale's eyes met hers, pride and quiet satisfaction glimmering in their golden depths. "You have done well," he said, voice low. "You are ready for more than I ever imagined." Seraphine allowed herself a small nod. "I am ready," she said, "but this is only the first test. There is more coming, I feel it." Damien approached cautiously, his expression conflicted. I saw what you did," he said quietly. "And I do not know how to speak to it. I do not know how to be near it, but I know one thing: I cannot turn away. You have changed everything I thought I knew." Seraphine studied him, her gaze steady and calm. "Then learn," she said softly. "Learn to see beyond your pride, beyond your regrets. Only then will you understand the power of what stands before you, and perhaps the lessons of the past you once ignored." The night deepened further, and the castle seemed to hold its breath. Whispers of the supernatural, of unseen watchers, and of ancient prophecies seemed to drift through the stone halls. Seraphine felt it in her bones. The threads of destiny were tightening, weaving her fate and that of Kale and Damien together in ways yet unknown. Kale placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, grounding her, reminding her that she was not alone. "The North is not the only threat," he said. "There are others who watch, who wait. Some will test your mind, some your heart. You must be vigilant." Seraphine nodded, her thoughts already racing. She understood the stakes now more clearly than ever. The shadows were not merely creatures of the north. They were manifestations of the delicate balance between mortal ambition, supernatural power, and the lingering threads of the past. And Damien, he was a thread she could not ignore, a living reminder of both love and betrayal, of lessons learned and mistakes that could shape what was to come. In the quiet that followed, Damien stepped closer once more. "Seraphine, I am afraid," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid of what I feel and afraid of what I cannot control. You are beyond anything I imagined, and yet I cannot walk away." Seraphine reached out, brushing her fingers lightly against his. "Fear is natural," she said softly, "but it is not weakness. It is a sign that you still have the capacity to grow, to learn, to become someone who can face the darkness without being consumed by it. That is why you are here." The moment was fragile, a balance of trust, tension, and unspoken longing. And then, from the shadows of the battlements, came a sound that made the blood in their veins run cold. A low, haunting chant, distant but insistent, echoing across the courtyard and up into the night sky. It was ancient, cruel, and filled with promise of something terrible yet to come. Kale's eyes narrowed, his body moving instinctively to the shadows. "They have returned," he said, "and this time they are not alone." Seraphine's gaze met Damien's, steady and unwavering. "Then we face it," she said, "together, but know this, the night will demand more than courage. It will demand choice and sacrifice. Are you ready for that?" Damien swallowed hard, nodding, his pride humbled, his heart uneasy but determined. I am," he said. Cliffhanger. The moon disappeared behind a heavy cloud, and in that darkness the shadows advanced, taller, faster, and more alive than before. Their whispers filled the night with a promise of chaos, testing Seraphine, Kale, and Damien in ways none of them could yet imagine. And in the very heart of the approaching darkness, a figure stepped forward, silent, familiar, and alive with secrets that would change everything. The night had grown thick, heavy with mist that rolled over the battlements of Castle Alaric. Shadows twisted unnaturally across the stone walls, stretching toward the moonless sky. Seraphine stood at the edge of the highest tower, her cloak whipping around her, eyes sharp and alert. Kale was at her side, silent as always, his presence a dark, unwavering anchor in the storm of uncertainty. Damien lingered slightly behind them, hands clenched, courage battling fear. The shadows that had begun their assault earlier now advanced more boldly, taking shape into grotesque forms that seemed both living and unreal. Eyes glimmered red in the dark, and a chilling whisper of ancient voices threaded through the night air. Seraphine felt the pulse of their energy, the invisible tug of dark magic, and understood that this was no ordinary attack. These were spirits of a long-forgotten curse, called forth by someone or something that had waited for this night. "We cannot let them breach the castle," Kale said quietly, his golden eyes scanning the horizon. "If they enter, all we have built will be at risk." Seraphine's fingers brushed lightly against the hilt of her dagger, but she did not move in haste. She could feel the energy in the courtyard, the subtle rhythm of the approaching danger, and she knew that to act without thought would be foolish. Power, she reminded herself, was not merely strength, it was control. "We face them here," she said calmly. "And we face them together." Damien's voice trembled slightly as he stepped closer. "Together," he repeated, almost as if saying it aloud made it more real. He had learned humility and caution, and in the quiet of his fear he had discovered a strange respect for Seraphine's strength. "I will not run," he added, his voice steadier now. "I will stand with you." The first wave of shadows surged forward, flowing like water across the courtyard. Their forms were unnerving, their movements fluid and unpredictable. Kale and Seraphine moved in tandem, a seamless rhythm of command and control. She guided subtle currents of energy, forming protective barriers that glimmered faintly in the night. Kale's power flowed into hers, not overtaking but strengthening, a dance of dark and light intertwined. Damien watched, awestruck, and then took action, remembering lessons from the night before. He had no magical power, but he had courage, precision, and determination. He used every advantage he had, stone, fire, and strategy, to disrupt the shadows' advance. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to push the creatures back, forcing them toward the northern edge of the castle grounds. For a moment, silence settled. The creatures paused, seemingly assessing the strength of their opponents. And then a single figure stepped from the mass of shadows, a tall, elegant shape, cloaked in black, face obscured by darkness. The air grew colder, the mist thickened, and a sense of recognition prickled at Seraphine's skin. She knew this presence. Somehow it was tied to her past, to the threads that had bound her destiny to Kale and to Damien. Kale's eyes narrowed. "It has chosen to reveal itself," he said quietly. "This one is not a mere shadow. It is alive, ancient, and dangerous." The figure moved forward, and Seraphine felt a strange pull at her heart. There was no malice in its energy, not exactly, but there was a challenge, an unspoken test. She stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Show yourself. I am Seraphine, and I will not be afraid." Slowly, the figure lifted its hood, revealing a face familiar yet changed. It was one of the spirits that had haunted her childhood dreams, a messenger of a forgotten curse, bound by the same prophecy that had drawn Kale and her together. Its eyes glimmered with light and shadow, a mix of sorrow and warning. "You carry the power," it said, voice echoing like wind through ice. "And you carry the choice. The balance of fate rests in your hands. One misstep and all will fall." Seraphine's heart beat steadily. She understood now that this night was more than a test of strength. It was a test of wisdom, of judgment, and of the heart. Damien, standing behind her, seemed to sense it as well. His pride had been tempered by fear, his arrogance softened by respect, and in that moment he realized the depth of responsibility that came with the lives around him. Kale's hand brushed hers. "Trust yourself," he said softly, "and trust your heart, but be ready to act." The spirit raised its hand, and shadows surged forward, larger, faster, more alive than before. Seraphine and Kale moved together, their energy weaving a protective dome over the castle grounds. Damien followed instructions carefully, positioning himself where the shadows threatened the walls, using fire and light to hold them at bay. Hours passed in a blur of movement, strategy, and quiet command. Seraphine's power had grown with Kale's guidance, yet she understood that strength alone would not win this battle. It was patience, observation, and courage that allowed them to anticipate the shadows' moves and counter them. Finally, as dawn approached, the shadows faltered. The figure at the heart of the storm stepped forward, its form beginning to shimmer and fade. "You have chosen well," it said. "You have faced the darkness, embraced your power, and yet shown mercy. That is the mark of true strength." Seraphine's heart stirred, a mixture of relief and quiet pride. She had survived the night, not only through power, but through wisdom, patience, and courage. Damien stepped forward cautiously, his eyes wide with admiration and newfound respect. You did it," he whispered, his voice heavy with emotion. "You, all of you, we." Kale's hand rested lightly on Seraphine's shoulder. "It is not over," he said quietly, "but the first test has passed. You are stronger than the shadows, stronger than doubt, and ready for what comes next." Seraphine smiled faintly, her gaze moving between Kale and Damien. "We are not just stronger," she said softly. "We are united, and that is what the shadows cannot break." For the first time, Damien allowed himself to look at her not as the woman he had lost, but as the force she had become. Pride and arrogance had faded into humility, and a sense of redemption began to bloom. I understand now," he said. "I understand what I lost, what I ignored, and I will not repeat my mistakes." Seraphine's eyes softened, a rare moment of warmth breaking through the shadowed intensity of the night. You may have lost the chance to shape my past, she said, but you still have the chance to influence the future. Learn, grow, and be better. That is all I ask. The mist began to lift as the first rays of dawn filtered across the castle grounds. The shadows receded, leaving the courtyard quiet but marked by the events of the night. Seraphine breathed deeply, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the exhilaration of survival and triumph. Kale's voice broke the silence, low and warm. The prophecy is not yet complete, he said, but we have survived its first trial, and together there is nothing we cannot face. Seraphine nodded, her hand finding his. Together, she echoed, and nothing will break what we have built. Damien watched them, a mixture of respect, awe, and quiet longing in his eyes. He had faced his own fears, recognized his failings, and begun a path of redemption. I will find my own way, he said softly. And perhaps, in time, I will be worthy of standing beside you, even if only as an ally. Seraphine's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Time will tell, she said, but for now let us embrace the day. The night has tested us, and we have emerged stronger, wiser, and united. The sun broke over the horizon, painting the castle walls in gold and rose. The wind carried away the lingering mist, and for the first time in what felt like ages, the world seemed quiet, peaceful, and full of promise. Seraphine stood on the battlements, Kale at her side, Damien behind them, and for a moment all three felt the fragile, luminous hope of a future shaped by courage, choice, and redemption. Yet even as the sun rose, Seraphine felt the pull of destiny in her veins. She knew that darkness would always return, that challenges would rise again. But she also knew that she was ready, stronger than fear, tempered by love and guided by wisdom. And with Kale by her side and Damien learning the lessons of the past, she believed that no shadow, no matter how dark, could ever break them completely.